Hello and welcome viewers. You're watching Perspective with your host Kriti Mishra. India is embarking on a major program to launch its maiden national level framework towards providing climate services and information. The National Framework for Climate Services, which is NFCS, will be spearheaded by the Indian Met Department. NFCS is based on the Global Framework for Climate Services. The Global Framework for Climate Services is a partnership of governments and organizations at a global level for the production and better usage of climate information and services. It envisions to bring a seamless working platform for users of climate information and services and help decide and mitigate climate risks for key sectors like agriculture, energy, disaster management, health and water. And for deeper insights on the framework, I'm joined by an illustrious panel of guests. Joining us in the studio, Mr. Mrityunjay Mohapatra, Director General, IMD. And joining us through virtual platform, Ulka Kelkar, Director Climate, WRI India. I welcome both of you to Sunset TV and thank you so much for joining us. And Mr. Mohapatra, let me begin the program with you. Now, the entire idea was mooted way back in 2008, but we did not really get desired results. It is only now that India is set to launch this maiden framework. So what does it mean for our country? What is it based on? And what is its significance?
Over the years, throughout the globe, there has been applications of weather informations, especially for disaster risk reductions and also for socio-economic development. But over the years also, we have got a lot of meteorological data collected through various platforms like surface-based observation, satellites, radars, etc. And utilizing this information, the climate of a particular place or the region or the country is defined. At least if you have got data of 30 years, you can develop the climate of the place. But again, the climate is not a constant phenomena. While weather changes rapidly from day to day, climate changes slowly. There is a variation within the season, one season to other season, and from year to year and from decade to decade. So with a lot of data, for example, in India Meteorological Department, we have got the data for more than 100 years in digital form. We have got a long series of the various climate parameters available for various purposes, especially for disaster risk reductions, agriculture, water, energy, etc. But if we just look at the application of weather has been increased manifold over the years, but the application of climate has been restricted or application has been limited in different countries. So considering this, the World Climate Conference in 2009 decided that we should have a global framework of climate services which will provide a baseline for development of the national framework of climate services. India Meteorological Department worked towards that directions, and over the years we have addressed many components, but the integral form of a national framework of climate services has not been launched so far. So we are working towards that, and towards the directions recently, just a few days back, we have a consultation workshop with the various types of stakeholders and users for development of national framework of climate services. So if you look at that, the basic goal of this national framework climate services is to ensure the information with respect to climate for safeguarding the society from various kind of vulnerabilities, maybe due to disasters or due to other weather and climate information related risks. The second point is that to mainstream the information on climate for the socio-economic development of the country. The third point is that if you look at the sustainable development goal of the globe and also in our country, there are various types of actions required, and all the actions the climate plays a dominant role. And especially if you look at SDG, there are 17 SDGs, 17 out of 17, 13 number calls for the climate actions. So therefore, there is a huge role of climate with respect to the sustainable development goal. So that is another goal of this national framework, to ensure the development, key development of the country with utilization of this one. The next goal is that to have a dialogue, have an interaction and a participatory mechanism with the service provider, say for example, India Meteorological Department, and the users. The users may be the general public, disaster managers and various stakeholders. So to carry out this national framework and global framework, the 5 pillars has been identified, that climate services can be augmented, and it is essential for the 5 pillars, namely the disaster risk reductions, the water, the agriculture and energy and health. Then to carry out this plan as per the National Framework for Climate Services, there has been the 5 components. The first component is that we should have the generation of the climate data and its provision to the general public and all the stakeholders. The second point is that we should have the climate predictions, climate research, and hence the services thereof. The third point is that we should have a climate forum in the national level, national climate forum, where the stakeholders and the service providers can work with each other, consult with each other for maximum utilization of climate information in the socio-economic development. The fourth pillar, you can say, is the development of the climate information services system. And that system itself means that there could be the integration of all types of data, all types of products, all types of models and research occurring in the country and outside, so as to in a common platform or framework, the services can be provided to all for its utilizations. So, like this, so there are very basic objectives under this National Framework of Climate Services. The last one is the capacity building of the stakeholders.
Yes.
So, if you just look at all these, be it agriculture or DRR or health or water, all these are utilizing weather information very efficiently. But there are certain information, for example, if you are planning to establish certain industry along the coastline or the hilly areas, all the urban areas, you have to consider the climate informations. Absolutely. And that climate information should be mainstreamed while taking a decision, while planning or implementing any programs in the country. So, these are the 5 objectives which is to consider while implementing the National Framework of Climate Services.
And so, of course, it goes beyond the national boundaries, because if you remember, in fact, during India's G20 presidency, there's undeterred focus on climate change. And in the recently concluded the P20 summit, there was a joint statement on sustainable energy transition. So, in that case, this assumes paramount importance.
Yes, you are right. When you consider the climate or the weather, it has no boundary. So, you have to take into consideration the global framework and also the regional framework. And I am happy to inform you that India Meteorological Department represents country as the permanent representative of World Meteorological Organizations, and I am at present the Vice President of WMO.
Yes.
And we act also as the global center, global production center to provide various weather and climate informations. We act as regional center to provide the various support to all the countries in this region, especially South Asia, Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, Middle East, in terms of weather and climate informations. So, we have to work also in that framework and involve the regional partners. Not only that, we also involve the academic and R&D institutes. They are part and parcel of this framework, where they can evaluate the climate information, number one, and also they can help in capacity building of the researchers, the practitioners, and also the various stakeholders.
Absolutely, sir.
And also, finally, we have to take care of the participation of the press and electronic media also, because you need a huge campaign for popularization and awareness on the climate utilization in each and every aspects of our life.
Absolutely. So, it's a participative framework that India is developing. But since we are talking about global frameworks, I'll take that to Ms. Kelkar. Ms. Kelkar, since the 2009 Declaration of Frameworks for Climate Services, Switzerland, China, Germany, and the United Kingdom have launched the NFCS. What are the key lessons for India as far as implementation is concerned?
Thank you so much, and thanks very much to Dr. Mahapatra for very clearly outlining the importance of this initiative for our country. I think some of the key lessons that have emerged, particularly in the last few years, is that new risks are emerging due to climate change. So the kinds of climate services that we have a lot of experience with in India, we have in fact decades of experience, not only with prediction, but also with extension. Well, now one of the issues that is emerging is that the risks that are emerging due to climate change are new. For example, you might have emergence of new types of pests or diseases. There are also compounded risks. For example, you might have a drought followed by a flood, followed by a locust attack. And there are also, as you both rightly pointed out just now, transboundary risks. For example, you might have flash flooding in the Himalayas, which leads to extreme rainfall in the Himalayas, which leads to flash flooding in the plains of Bihar. So as a result of this, we do need a lot of cooperation and a consistent or a standardized global framework for this cooperation. And I think these are some of the lessons that we've been learning. The second broad lesson is the need to reach users who will be responding to these new risks due to climate change. And here, actually, India has a lot to teach others because we have a lot of experience with low-cost extension services through our network of agricultural universities, Krishi Vigyan Kendras, NGOs. And here, the kinds of developments that have been happening with digital public infrastructure in India in the last decade or so are also very valuable because they're a way of reaching the last mile, the last users. And this is very important because in a country like India, we need community-based adaptation. It may not be the same sort of approaches that are there from other countries that you mentioned, the Western countries, but a different sort of approach. Here we have a lot of traditional experience. For example, the case of Hivre Bazaar, where water user associations were formed and the community themselves decided that based on the rainfall predicted for that year, they would change their cropping pattern. But with the use of digital public infrastructure, with the use of modern ICT, information communication technologies, these climate services can reach more people and at low cost. I think the third big learning that we have made is the fact that these kinds of climate services now have new users. So not just the kinds of farmers or low-cost communities that I mentioned, but also new sectors like infrastructure, power sector, health infrastructure. For example, 40% of India's thermal power plants are located in areas which are highly water stressed. So when there is a drought or when there is a heat wave, these power plants also get less water for their cooling operations. Similarly, as India gets more and more wind power plants, during the monsoon, the wind speed becomes a very important factor to predicting what the wind power generation will be. And in some years, we find that there is a deviation of as much as 40% in the wind speeds. So now you have new users who are entering the market, who are able to actually pay commercial rates for the availability of this kind of predictive services. But we also find more and more limits to commercial business models. Take insurance, for example. Insurance is something which in India has a very low penetration, and we certainly need much more insurance availability. But when the risks due to climate change start becoming more frequent or more widespread, insurance premiums start rising. Or sometimes insurance companies, private insurers, might actually withdraw from a region. So one of the learnings that has happened in the last decade or so is the need for private insurance to be backed by reinsurance, and that to be backed by government aid, by government public funding. I think these kinds of new business models have also been tried out in Africa, in Latin America, and there have been pilots in India as well. Weather indexed insurance, for example, has been offered by the Agriculture Insurance Corporation for many years now. So I think these are some of the learnings that we have: new risks due to climate change, new users, new sectors, the need to reach low-cost, in a low-cost manner, low-income communities who are able to make changes, and finally, the need to supplement commercial business models with government support as well.
Well, absolutely. That's a very, very valid point and an important point that you're raising, ma'am. I'll take that to Dr. Mahapatra. Dr. Mahapatra, how do we bridge this gap between several agencies, as Ms. Kelkar pointed out, for instance, insurance for that matter? Yeah,
whatever points has been raised by Dr. Kelkar is really relevant. I want to say that while the weather information and its utilization has increased manifold, resulting in established early warning systems and hence the early action by the government and all the stakeholders, and thus reducing the loss of lives, especially if you look at heat waves or the tropical cyclones, etc. The utilization of the climate informations, basically if you just look at it, targets towards the long-term measures,
right,
which can take care of the long-term risks, long-term vulnerability. So therefore, we have the scope to utilize this climate information in each and every sector, including the insurance, which is common of course for agriculture sector, water sector, health sector, and energy sector also. All the establishments which is coming up under these various economic developments also should be insured. At the same time, each individual also should be insured. For example, I will tell, over the periods, if you just look at the extreme weather events are increasing,
right,
and their frequency and intensity is also increasing. Therefore, even though we have minimized the loss of lives, for example, in case of tropical cyclones and heat wave, but the loss of property goes on increasing. So therefore, if you want to sustain the development in terms of economy, we have to address the various sectors, including the resilience, and that resilience can be brought up with the climate informations, number one, and other measures like say insurance, etc., for the community, for the individual, and also for the establishments concerned. So we have to go a long way, and that will be possible only if there is a dialogue and only if there is a mainstream of the climate information with all the agencies, and that can be put forth through a legal framework perhaps. The country can bring out a legal framework under which the utilization of climate informations with respect to say insurance or with respect to the various policy decisions and implementations with respect to agriculture or health or industry or power could be ensured.
Absolutely, sir. You mentioned these sectors, but we can go beyond these sectors, and I'd like to understand that from Ms. Kelkar. Ms. Kelkar, at present, the priority sectors where the GFCS focuses upon are agriculture, food security, energy, health and water, and of course, disaster risk reduction. But along with these identified sectors of focus, what are the other sectors that India could focus on?
I think these are some of the most important sectors. And if you see something like DRR, disaster risk reduction, it really touches on every other sector. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of these sectors and then speak about some of the additional sectors that India could focus on. So, for example, in agriculture, I think Dr. Mahapatra has explained very well the rich history that India has, the experience that it has in reaching out to farmers with weather advisories, with irrigation advisories. Bulk of our country still practices rain-fed farming. Right. But when irrigation is there, the timing of that irrigation, the amount of that irrigation, that can be adjusted according to accurate weather forecasts. But increasingly, our farmers are also adopting horticultural crops, cash crops, different kinds of crops for export. There is a need for farmers to have access to cold chain infrastructure so that they're able to market their produce at the right time in the right markets and get the right prices. So whenever there is this commercialization of agriculture and whenever you have this value chain that is connecting the farmer to the market, the importance of weather advisories and climate services becomes even more important because much more amounts of cash really are at stake compared to the subsistence farming from before. In the energy sector, I think I've already mentioned the example of wind power. Even for solar power generation on foggy days, cloudy days, more polluted days, the yield of solar power gets affected. And as a result of which, even for the solar industry, which is really growing in India and is very important to meeting our net zero goals, accurate climate services are really very important. For health sector, every April, May, we are hearing news about the hottest day of the decade, hottest day of the century. It's really very important for this climate services framework to complement the heat action plans that are being adopted by India's states and cities. And certainly for water, it becomes very important to think of water as an integrated resource where we have groundwater as well as surface water, and where we have water being used for agricultural purposes, which is really the largest consumer, but also for industrial purposes, for private purposes, and for all of these to be informed by predictions about the monsoon. But I'll add a couple of other sectors to this. I would add the industry sector is something that is increasingly facing climate risks. And these are risks which are not located to one specific place. For example, about 10 years ago in Thailand, there were floods in Bangkok. And after the floods, it was discovered that the supply chains of computers, Samsung, Sony, all of these big manufacturers were hit because all the hard drives were being made in this one location, in this one facility in Thailand. And as a result of this, Japan's economy, Japan's GDP was hit by 4% during that quarter. So increasingly, we are finding out how interconnected industry is and that these climate risks have very far-reaching effects.
That's right.
Specifically
Absolutely.
within industry, I would point out the need for India to focus on micro, small and medium enterprises. MSMEs employ 100 million workers and they're responsible for almost a third of our GDP, industrial GDP. And these require definitely a lot of support when it comes to heat risks, flooding risks. For example, we are working in Surat in the textile sector, and
Right.
there we find that the industries are vulnerable both to river flooding as well as to the sea creek flooding. And finally, I'll just add one line about tourism. Many of our very important heritage sites, for example, Gaya in Bihar, are highly vulnerable to extreme heat. I think coastal areas as well, I need not say. But tourism is another sector which can definitely use these climate services by providing information both to those who are in this industry, in this business, as well as to those people like us who will be using these services.
Absolutely, ma'am. Point well taken. But before I wrap up the show, Dr. Mahapatra, over the years, IMD has upgraded the facilities, the weather observation stations across the country. But, sir, there are still difficult terrains, high seas, where perhaps the data is not available. Do you think that is a huge challenge?
Yeah, it is a challenge. If you consider the physiography of India, it is bounded by the Himalayas in the north, and you have got the Bay of Bengal to the east and Arabian Sea to the west and Indian Ocean to the south. And also in addition, we have got many hill ranges within the country itself, we have got the deserts, etc. These are all data sparse region. So, over the periods, what we have done actually, we have gone for direct observations along with the remotely sensed observations, satellites, radars, etc. That has helped India to augment its climatological data and as well as weather data. But there is still scope to augment it further. For that purpose, IMD is continuously enhancing and upgrading its own observational network, and also there is need for public-private participations.
Yes.
So, there are many academic institutes, R&D institutes and state governments, they are also putting off the various types of observational network. So, we are planning now under this framework, all this data available from various sources could be integrated along with the international data where India Meteorology Department is also accessing because of these multilateral cooperations. So, apart from that, you will be happy to know that we have also addressed various components of the National Framework Climate Services. The first one is that, as you told, the climate data and services has been upgraded, and now anyone can access the data through online platform. We have developed a climate data services portal where anyone for this any purpose can have the data. The second one is during past 10 years, actually especially in 2014, we introduced the climate predictions. There was earlier only statistical predictions, dynamical prediction system was established, and we provide now, as of this year, every month we provide the forecast for next month and the next season.
Right.
And it is not only with respect to rainfall and temperature, but also with respect to various types of processes like El Nino or La Nina or Indian Ocean Dipole. And these informations are also provided not only to India, but also all the countries in South Asia and adjoining areas. Apart from that, with respect to the development of the information services, now you will find that even automated weather stations data are available in online platform from India Meteorology Department every hour. Also, we have got all types of climate informations, climate data available in an online platform.
Right.
With respect to developing the system framework, what we have done actually, we have gone for indigenous development under this Atmanirbhar Bharat, and
Yes.
also we have involved our bilateral cooperation with many academic R&D institutes and also multilateral cooperation with different countries. So, we are already in the path, and within next year, we will have a dedicated national framework for climate services.
Absolutely, sir. And we do hope that NFCS will provide an improved observational network and also provide impeccable data integration and data inflow. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Mahapatra and Ms. Kelkar. Well, viewers, that's all we had for you in this edition. Thanks for watching and stay tuned to Sunset TV. Goodbye for now from my side.